If you're in the business of self-publishing, there's a good chance that you might have heard of something called ghostwriting, meaning that you hire another writer to write a book for you. Now, this is a rather polarizing subject because some people either don't understand it or they do understand it and may not like it, or maybe they like it. So I thought we'd go ahead and sit down with somebody who is actually a ghostwriter, who's actively doing this. As a freelance writer, a good friend of mine, Louis Martin, is going to share just some of this information and hopefully give you a little bit more insights on what it's like as a ghostwriter on that end of things, because I think a lot of people don't quite understand that it's not just about the person who's purchasing from the ghostwriter, but also the person who's making the livelihood, the ghostwriter themselves. So without any further ado, let's jump on into this interview with a good friend of mine, Louis Martin.
So Louis, how far do we go back? I know you stumbled over me at some point or another and had reached out to me.
Yeah, I first heard about you in 2018, probably. I self-published a book, and lo and behold, it did not sell out overnight. I was not a bestseller. It was not discovered organically, and I was like, maybe I should learn a little bit about marketing. And you were, one of the early sort of players in that space, at least on YouTube. That's where I discovered you. And I remember I still saved to my videos. I have one of your long form conversations with another author who is really good at Amazon ads. And I still send it to clients when I'm helping them run Amazon ads. And I'm like, hey, this video is an hour long, but it's a really good primer on just like setting your bids and etc. And then after that, I just kind of kept you on in the podcast rotation from time to time.
Oh, very, very cool. I know you eventually had reached out to me. We got connected through Union Square Reviews, right? Because you guys were looking to get a little bit more press towards that direction.
Yeah. You're responsible for my whole career is what I'm trying to say. So in a roundabout way, I learned how to do ads from you and a lot of other sources, Kindlepreneur, and I got KDP Rocket and all that. And I started learning more about SEO for Amazon, started a Fiverr gig, helping people run ads. I just kept making deals. I got a lot of reviews, and then eventually a publisher contacted me, and that was Dart Frog Books. And they said, hey, just do what you do on Fiverr for us. We'll pay you a little more. And I was like, done. And then that publisher, Dart Frog, they have a review company, Union Square Reviews, and I started working a little bit more with them. And one day, we were talking about ideas for marketing and getting the word, and I was like, we should reach out to YouTubers, and I know just the one to start with, and that was you.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, and I love the kudos, and I like the fact that you also highlight the fact that you didn't just rely on me as the sole source. Who are some content creators out there that you learn a lot from? I know you mentioned Dave Chesson, the Kindlepreneur. Who are some other ones that you like to listen to?
I believe his name's Marco. He went on to start the Urban Writers. Do you remember his last name?
Marco Motino. Actually, he's really good friends. He and his wife are so fantastic to my wife and I.
Awesome. So before he started Urban Writers, he was on your show, and that's the episode that I was saying. It was like an hour long where he was walking through Amazon ads and just showing, from a really sort of mathematical standpoint, like, okay, if you bid this high, and your book retails for this much and Amazon takes this and this, it's not financially viable. So that's your threshold. And so he's a guy that I keep in with. And the Kindlepreneur team, I mean, they're always making content. They're always improving, not just KDP Rocket, but some of their I use their book description generator and things like that. So big fan of that. And I can't recommend, Dave and his blog and his newsletter enough.
You and I had a little bit of a conversation prior to getting connected, and I thought it very fascinating when you had mentioned this, that you actually do some ghostwriting. How the heck did you stumble into that?
Yeah, I think the ghostwriting community seems to me to be very small. I mean, 1,000 or less people in the U.S. that are doing a lot of ghostwriting. So I think everyone sort of stumbles into it. I think a lot of people start off as editors and then they get really good at editing if they're working for a publisher. I think all the major publishers probably have a little army of ghostwriters that they just call editors. And you're technically an editor, but I mean, let's face it, there's a huge sort of celebrity book industry. A lot of people with interesting stories, they want to write books, they don't have the time, and that's where people rely on ghostwriters. And I was doing kind of editorial work for Dart Frog Books. I was helping authors, actually not edit, I was helping them run their Amazon ads and get set up with the correct categories so that they can have an easier path to #1 new release and bestseller. They knew I had written a book. I have a certain niche I write about, which is rare. I write about martial arts, which it's hard to find a ghostwriter in if you don't, do that and you're not familiar with that world. And they had an athlete named Tom DeBlas who he's a former UFC fighter, and he's in that community he's a known name. And they said, hey, like, I don't think our regular ghostwriter can do this kind of writing. Can you do it? And that's kind of how it started.
Wow. So there's so much we can unpack here in just talking about ghostwriting. And I think there is a lot of resistance, especially from authors who like to put their name on their work. Some people feel that doing ghostwriting is unethical because you're fooling the readers. What would you say in favor of ghostwriting? What would be the one thing that you can say is the huge difference between someone writing their own book and writing a book for somebody else?
I think ghostwriting is kind of a pejorative term. I tend to think of it as co-writing or co-authoring. And actually, in the book I published last year with Tom DeBlas, I was listed as a co-author. And that's something that I negotiated when we got down to write out a contract, just because I figured worst they could say is no, And I studied some other ghostwriters. The guy that wrote the Trump book in the 90s, I forget what it was called, but it was a book of some note. It was his biography. He negotiated as a co-author. So he had a credit on the front page that was in his contract. And I saw an interview with him talking about how he kind of threw the Hail Mary and he was surprised they said yes. So I asked for the same thing. But to answer your question more directly, what I always say is like you're the writer, but it's not necessarily your story. So you're not necessarily like fabricating something from scratch and just completely, inventing a narrative and then handing it to the other person and it's done. There's some authors that might do that, but with me, when I co-author with someone, I mean, I really sit down and have a lot of contact with them over a period of about a year, in which they give me the story, I write it, they come back and give me feedback. So it really feels more 50-50 to me. It's not like I interview them for an hour and I'll be like, cool, I'll have the book in 4 months or something.
Right. It's probably a lot more work involved than just an hour of sitting down. I love how you say co-authoring. That is just absolutely brilliant. So as a ghostwriter, if I am looking to, say, hire you, what are some of the best practices to get the most out of that relationship with you as a ghostwriter?
Like from an author perspective?
Yeah, so I just say, I want to put my bio together, and I'm going to have you ghostwrite it for me.
I mean, I would say that, so why do people ghostwrite? It's mainly because they'll say, well, I don't have the time or the skill to do writing. If you don't have the skill, that's fine. That's a great reason to hire a ghostwriter. If you don't have the time, then I would say be careful, because you are going to save time when you hire a ghostwriter, but you're also going to still spend a lot of time if you want to do it the right way. You need to be willing to give someone access to you for, I don't know, 5 hours a week or something like that. Depending on how you want to do it, maybe you say, okay, we're going to meet once a week. We're going to talk for an hour, and I'm going to give you the story of my entire life in bits and chunks, or maybe you just do it all over text or over email or something like that. But you do need to understand it's still a commitment. So if you're willing to do that, and if you're willing to give someone, real access into your life, those are the two prerequisites, I would say.
Excellent. So where would I find a good ghostwriter other than reaching out to you?
Well, a lot of all the major publishers have ghostwriters. For a lot of people out there, you won't have access to a major publisher. Obviously, they're really selective, so you need to be famous essentially and show that you're kind of a proven seller and that you can move units. There are a lot of publishers out there that you will pay them, and they will provide you with a ghostwriter, as well as many other services. They'll do cover design, and they'll do editing, and they will just handle all the production side. Dart Frog Books is one of them. If you have a great story, then you can pay Dart Frog Books, and they will help you write your book, and they'll help you do everything else to get your book published, which seems pretty fair for me. I mean, you pay for services everywhere else. That's how it works. Or you could always just find a freelancer. The freelancing market has changed a lot. When you hire a ghostwriter on a site like Fiverr, they're going to make the vast majority of that money. They're probably going to charge you less because there's no publisher that has overhead expenses. And then you just have to be sure that you vet them carefully, and freelance sites are great for that. Writers have reviews. You can see often snippets of their work. So I think that's a great place to start.
Okay, so this is excellent advice. One thing I'm kind of starting to think about is, from a legality standpoint, like what are some, say, legal forms that I need to put in place to make sure that I own 100% of the rights of that specific work done by the ghostwriter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one, you absolutely need a contract. That's really important. Don't do anything off trust or off a handshake. If you can retain an attorney to do that, I don't think that's a terrible idea in the grand scheme of things, particularly if you think the book has monetary value and it could have a long lifespan. Otherwise, you can use one of these free services that have shell kind of legal documents, templates that you can kind of plug and play. With the book that I'm writing now, that I'm ghostwriting, we drew up our own contract. And we electronically signed it. We used DocuSign to make sure it was, kind of legally binding. And we wrote a long one. It was like 3 pages long, and it covered a lot of different scenarios. And it can feel weird doing that because, there's the paranoia part of your brain that can turn on and be like, oh my God, like, is this contract really deep because this person's going to backstab me? But really, I'd say like a contract, it reinforces trust. And what I tell my authors is like, so one thing in our contracts is the book needs to be done by this time, foreseeing any, barring any unforeseen acts of God or something like that. And we put, a date, or we say in Q4 of 2023. But what I tell the authors is, hey, this is in the contract. If we want to deviate from this because we're two adults with lives, then we can do that. As long as we have the trust, amongst ourselves. But our fallback is always the contract. When there's a disagreement, we say, what does the contract say?
So that assigns all of the rights. What about things like, say, non-disclosure agreements? Do I need to worry about something like that, or is that something you build into the entire contract itself?
Yeah, I would definitely put it in the contract as far as who gets the credits, who owns the work, who gets all the payments. And from a writer's perspective, you need to remember that if you're getting a royalty share, this person has to pay you every month for the rest of your life, in theory. So, it's a big commitment, and you need to be really comfortable getting into bed with this person, and, making sure they're organized and that they're trustworthy. So what I always recommend, like with payments, is I do not recommend getting a royalty share. I recommend just get the money up front from your author, because you really don't know what books are going to sell. Most books will not sell. If a famous person wants to hire you, their fame will not translate into sales necessarily. Sometimes it will. But, if they're famous on Instagram, guess what? It doesn't cost anyone to follow anyone on Instagram. So that's not necessarily like the best indicator that you can monetize your audience. So what I'd recommend for authors is just get a flat fee or get a per word fee. And then if you're person hiring you is serious, they will pay that. And if they have the financial means, they'll pay that. And that's a good sign. That means that they're serious. They're ready to financially commit. And if not, then you should take a royalty, and it should be substantive, because you're taking a risk. If they can't afford to pay you what you need up front, you're taking a big risk. You don't know if this book's going to be successful. So don't be afraid to ask for, a respectable amount.
Do you ever do like, say, a royalty share as well as an upfront like payment? So kind of like a royalty share plus type agreement?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a deal you can do is, okay, pay me per word. It's not going to be 10 cents per word or whatever, like a freelance writer writing for a blog or something would make. It's going to have to be a lot less, because these are, 50, 60,000 word books. And what you can do in the contract is you can say, hey, this book's going to be at least 60,000 words. And for those 60,000, I'm guaranteed something like, 3, 4, 5 cents a word. If it goes over, then maybe you get a discount. So anything above 60,000, then we're talking 2 cents a word or something like that, if that makes sense. And then you pay me half up front, and then you pay me half upon completion. And if someone can't pay you what you think you need, then you say, okay, well then you pay me what you can, and then on the back end I get a royalty, and that royalty is, it's less. It's split. So it's, you pay me 4 cents a word, even though I wanted 6. And then in return, you give me a 10% royalty in perpetuity or something like that.
Now, speaking of payments, I know this is a rather rudimentary question, but I'm sure there's some people that want to know what's probably the best way to make payments with a ghostwriter, or to accept as a ghostwriter.
So the one I did with Dart Frog, they pay me through the company, which is good, because then everything is like trackable. The taxes are paid by both of us. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, that makes sense. The taxes are paid by both of us, because I include it as taxable income I got from them. They pay taxes from their revenue. The taxes is kind of important. If someone is, if you're being hired by a private individual and they're making 100% of the income, and they're passing off your portion of the royalty, that's something to talk with them about, is like, who's going to pay the taxes on this? Because presumably it's going to be them right off the bat.
Right.
Because on paper, they're making all the money and they're just giving it to you. So the bottom line is, I would recommend, if you're getting hired by an individual, they should have a company like an LLC, and that person or that entity is kind of paying you. And that way it's a lot more navigable from a business standpoint, instead of like Dale just mailed me a check or something like that.
Wait, we don't mail checks anymore?
Right. Yeah. Or paid me on PayPal or something. On PayPal, you don't have to disclose that from tax purposes if you live in the US, unless you make a lot of money. Last I remember, unless they change something. So that's something that you could get in some trouble with if you're raking in $19,999 and you're like, oh, I don't have to report it.
Right. I can definitely see that happening. So when you're getting paid, so if I'm hiring you, Louis, let's say I'm going to go do it through my company, what's the best payment provider like that I need to do that through? Do I just electronically wire something, say through an ACH, direct deposit? Do I do PayPal? What's the best protocol for you?
You're getting a little bit outside my realm, because I've only used PayPal, and I've used Square. I just started using Square payments.
Oh, nice.
And because I have never hired anyone to write a book for me, I only know like the reciprocal end, where if I'm sending money on PayPal, I have to pay fees on that if it's a business PayPal, as opposed to a personal PayPal. So, I mean, I would say get the best fees that you can. That'd be my best advice.
Right.
You
just
know
find
probably
what's gonna
more
work.
than that than me, because you probably pay people way more than I do.
Yeah, I do quite a bit. And one of the things I think that's good etiquette when you're working with somebody, an independent contractor, as I would refer to you as, when I do a payment, say through PayPal, I make sure that I cover and I eat those fees, because that's not right for them to lose that money just because they need to get it from you. But direct deposit's almost always a nice way. It's a little bit tougher. QuickBooks, I think, has an integration that you're able to kind of do like ACH. But that's a whole other thing altogether. But let's wrap up today's podcast, because I always ask my guests this question, and that is, what advice do you have for aspiring authors and self-publishers?
Oh, man, how much time do you got? What advice do my best advice is that the modern writer needs to be more than just a writer. The modern writer has to be a marketer. You have to be tech savvy. You have to be willing to explore different platforms. And, these people that are like, I just want to focus on the writing. Those days are long gone, man. Like in the 70s, Stephen King could do that. He just sent the manuscript to Random House or whoever, and they took care of it. But nowadays, like if you're a writer, you are your own business, and it's time to kind of get your hands dirty. And on the other side of that, the rewards could be far greater than ever before. So if you're willing to do that, you can have more money than a lot of authors in the past did. The gateways have been removed. You just got to be willing to be a 360 business.
Big shout out and thanks to Louis for taking some time out of his day to spend some time with us. Hey, folks, make sure you go over and follow him on Instagram when you get a minute. That definitely would make his day. And of course, reach out to him if you're looking for a good ghostwriter. Louis is a good guy. I got to meet him through Dart Frog Books a long time back. Good dude. But in the meantime, I will catch you in next week's interview here on Self-Publishing with Dale.